Five.
Don't everyone talk at once.
We're live!
I'm waiting for Dan to do a standard intro. Let's hit my mute button.
That's a mute button.
We're muted.
I love the audio screen infinity.
Welcome to Eternity. Hello,
Audio
everybody.
section.
Hope you enjoy it. All right, we all made it. I think we're all here.
So,
Everybody can hear everything. How's everybody doing tonight?
Well, I'm good.
hanging in.
Yeah, feel free to chime in whenever you want,
I'm waiting for the grand presentation with the welcome everyone. Here's your people. Here's your whatever. I'm deferring.
All right.
I-
Here we are. Okay. Well, as you can see, we have a panel with us tonight, and someone on the, well, let's introduce everybody. You know me already. Hi, everybody. We have Steve from New Jersey joining us. We have Josh from New York. And we've got Anthony in Connecticut.
Hello.
And really the thing we're going to talk about tonight is travel this year, which was obviously very different than in most years. And we thought that we would all come together to talk about some of our experiences and some of the things we encountered along the way, and also maybe some tips that we might have for people should they find themselves traveling in the not-so-distant future. Guys, do we want to issue a disclaimer before we get started?
I think we do.
Yes.
So what should we put out there as a disclaimer? How would we want to put this?
Well, I would put out there that, first of all, nobody talking here is an expert in public health or medicine. We're all just a bunch of seasoned travelers who are sharing our own personal experiences and perspectives on this matter. In general, to everyone out there who might be watching, again, I'm going to repeat words I think I've said on a few calls earlier this year, which is, please don't do anything stupid.
I'm going to issue my own disclaimer that everything I did was in accordance with my state's policies. New Jersey was not as restrictive as other states such as New York, so our policies they're not enforced in a legal perspective. Not to say that they're not mandatory, but I obeyed them, including isolating after travel. So I encourage anyone who travels, follow your state's or whatever jurisdiction you may be in, follow the requirements.
Yeah, I have to agree with all of that. I, again, also followed all of New York's various travel requirements. I very painstakingly arranged my travels so that I was not in violation of anything. And I suggest if you decide to travel, be very careful with what you do, and don't do anything stupid, please.
Yeah, and every state has different requirements. Every state has different lists of states that require quarantine upon returning from traveling to. So again, it's not there isn't a one solution for all four of us. There isn't a solution for any group of people that is common. So yeah, you have to check in with your destination ahead of time, and again, don't do anything stupid. That's 3 times now that we've said that. All right, so where do we want to start? What do you guys want to talk about? I mean, should we go in order from March through the present?
You had you had different folders, it looked like, from different aspects of travel experience. So maybe we want to talk about flying, driving, other transportation modes, talk about where we stay, where we eat, what else we do.
Yeah, I think that subject by subject is the kind of the best way to go about this.
Yeah.
Well, let's do air travel. I know that. Has everybody in this group done air travel this year with restrictions?
I have.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that's all 4 of us.
I think Josh has the most interesting experience of all of us there.
Yeah, because it wasn't exactly by choice, but yeah.
You care to recount that and some of that stuff?
Yeah. Okay. So in this group, I am the only person who has flown internationally since the pandemic started. And I will say that was not by choice, because when I flew over to the United Kingdom on March 7th, there were not any travel restrictions whatsoever. Upon return, entirely different story. Flying out was really just like any other flight. I mean, there was one person at JFK wearing a mask, but outside of that, everything was pretty much as normal. Flying back, Heathrow, the day before the travel ban from the UK into the US went into effect, they were funneling everybody bound for the United States to a single check-in desk, checking all of our documents at this desk, handing out the various quarantine forms. The US had a hastily made a health declaration form that I had to fill out. Upon arriving back at JFK, they inspected every plane as we had planed. So I had to sit on the plane until CDC showed up to interview every person on the plane, and it was a health check. So, but yeah, outside of that, it was a pretty normal flying experience.
Yeah, other than that, everything was great.
Yeah, outside of having to talk to a CDC and sit on the tarmac for 2 hours, it was just fine.
So 2 hours was about how long you got delayed because of this on the arriving end.
Yes, that was
right, well,
how long I sat. I was sitting at a gate at JFK for 2 hours.
I do definitely remember hearing stories about some people facing far worse delays than that. So all things considered.
Once the travel ban went into effect, I started thinking I might be waiting 5-6+ hours. So I was honestly quite happy that it was only 2, because only 2 hours meant I could actually at home that night. If it was 6 hours, I would not have at home that night.
Right. Well, and then they told you needed to quarantine for 2 weeks, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was not expected either, but hey, thankfully I was able to.
Well, you got no life anyway, so it's easy for you.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and you also came away from that experience without ever feeling sick, as I recall. So yeah, it was
I mean,
okay.
It was a purely precautionary, but
Right. Well, I think that's the idea behind most of these quarantine rules is that it is precautionary, right? It's a question of, well, we're not sure, so yeah, I know. So I have flown twice this year since March, though. Yeah, my first occasion flying was at the end of June. That was at a time period where the caseload in the country was fairly close to the minimum it had been since the start of things, although it was starting to tick back up in some states. And yeah, by that point, the airlines were all mandating masks, and compliance with that was very good. Everybody on all the planes I was on had a mask on the whole time, including myself. A couple of the flights I was on were mostly full. The other couple, because I had to connect both ways due to the reduced schedule, were maybe only 2/3 to 3/4 full, but still, it was not empty, certainly, like some planes were in April, which I did not experience personally. I was staying close to home then. And yeah, I think it's tricky because when you're on an airplane, obviously you're among other people, and that's one variable that you can't control aside from not flying. But it does, at least for me, give me a lot of comfort that they do make everyone wear masks. At least American Airlines was. From what I've heard, other airlines have been doing similar, and they don't mess around about it either. You got to board the plane single file. They will not let you get on if you're not wearing a mask.
My flying experience was specifically with United. I flew to Texas over Labor Day weekend, and there was very little changed in their procedures. They did board 5 rows at a time as opposed to their usual groups 1, 2, 3, 4. But first of all, it wasn't row by row. It was 5 rows, so you're still mixed in there. The first class went in first, so you had to walk past those people, plus anyone with children, the veterans, etc. They did all of their usual pre-boarding classes. And something I still think would make sense even post-pandemic is, all right, the disabled people should go on first. That much makes sense. After that, board from the back of the plane forward, keep the people you like most in a nice lounge for free, and then bring them out at the very end so that they're not sitting on the plane the whole time. I think they would like that better, and now you're not filing people past other people. So that would have made a lot of sense, and that's other than the airline companies that do things like first come, first serve, or have no first class. I was a little surprised that there weren't more accommodations for that.
Go ahead.
I also, for my first flight down, I was given a middle seat, and I asked to change to a row without someone. I don't even know if I had a middle seat, but I know I asked to change to a row that didn't have someone in a middle seat, so I could maintain a little bit of distance. And they did, but they did say normally we wouldn't do this for a basic ticket type. I, again, was surprised that the airlines, at least United, was not trying to space out people if it had the ability to. That it was, when I got on that flight, the back 7 or 8 rows were full of people in every seat. The middle 10 or 12 rows of the plane were completely empty. There were 5 people, I think, in 12 or 13 rows, and then you had first class. So, and this was in September, so they had plenty of time to think this through and come up with something better. So I was dismayed by that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just going to note that there are plenty of videos on YouTube discussing airplane boarding procedures and which ones aren't optimal. So doesn't need to be a subject for us tonight, but worth noting that it's out there if you're interested.
Yeah, and as far as I'm concerned, the only plane trip I took was in September, out to Michigan. In fact, we can go now to the desktop here. I'll take you through some of the experience. So I caught a direct flight from Albany, New York, out to Detroit. And this is Labor Day weekend, right? And you would think there would be maybe a few more people in the check-in counter area than there were on this day. You have your typical signage, like you have here once you get past security. We've been seeing signs like this since the spring, right? 6 feet apart. Mask wearing mandatory within the terminal and, of course, on the airplane. Lots of hand sanitizing stations, stuff like that. Here's a thing that New York does where, again, I mentioned that enforcement depends on the state that you're in. New York has booths like this set up where upon disembarking they hand you your paperwork to fill out for contact tracing purposes if you're arriving from a state that is on the advisory list. And at the time that I went to Michigan was not on New York's advisory list, so I actually was able to bypass doing all of this. Again, another empty terminal area in Albany. So they have seats X'd out for social distancing purposes in the waiting area for the flight that I was going to board. My flight to Michigan was pretty empty. I would say it was like 20% occupied, but my flight back to New York was full.
How did those X's actually work? At Newark, they taped over the seats to put more of a barrier down.
Yeah, they didn't actually. That's all they did. I guess people are going to assume that, I shouldn't sit in that seat because there's a big X on it.
Did you see it?
That's about all they did at JFK too. When I was there in the beginning of October, in June they hadn't done any of this yet. The seats were all unmarked.
Wow. That was compliance, in your experience.
With people not sitting next to each other, generally good everywhere I went. Even I think it was fascinating though that because of how New York has kind of been turned into a spoke, the terminals at JFK are kind of not very busy at all. But at some of the other airports I ended up in, they were a lot busier, and so it was a little bit more difficult to just stay away from people. But at least you get decently good mask compliance no matter where you go. It seems not perfect, but you get it. I know. I also, Dan, are you done going through pictures?
Yeah, these are just a couple of scenes from Detroit.
Okay.
So
yeah, because I want to address a viewer question then regarding refreshments on flights.
Okay.
So in June I flew from New York to St. Louis with a connection both ways via Charlotte on the way out and via DC on the way back. They just didn't give us refreshments on those planes because they were short flights, and the way they were handling it at that time is basically, if it's a flight that's under 2 hours long or whatever it is, no refreshments in coach class.
No water?
They didn't give us anything.
Wow.
Even because it was too short of a flight. That said, in early October, when I flew to Phoenix, two things were different. One was that was a much longer flight. Two was, in that case, I was flying first class. And so, in that case, they absolutely gave us refreshments multiple times during the flight. Even they even offered us, a quote unquote meal, and the interesting experience I had here that I thought was an interesting thing to see empirically was. I figured, okay, part of being in first class is the seats are more spaced out, so you'll have a little bit more distance from people than you might in the back of the plane. And I had a bunch of spare miles to burn, so I figured, why not? And what I realized was that on this flight, they were not giving refreshments to anyone in coach class except on request, whereas they were coming around to hand out refreshments to everyone in first class all at the same time. And when you're eating or you're drinking, you are allowed to remove your mask, so suddenly everyone in first class has their mask off at the same time, and it's like, oh great. I didn't think of this.
Yeah,
that's interesting. On my flight to Texas, which was it was over 2 hours. It wasn't that much over 2 hours, but they came by. They had a fairly normal service. They came by with the drinks. They came by, as I said, they had individually wrapped snacks, which really isn't much different than usual. They just gave me a bag instead of giving me things separately, and then I got whatever was in the bag. But if I wanted another drink, I could push the button and get another drink. It pretty much was normal other than receiving things in the bag. So it was just up to, do I feel comfortable eating? I ended up putting food inside my mask. Like, I'd slip it off, eat, and then quickly put the mask back on.
Yep.
But the person on the return flight, which was relatively full, and I did have someone next to me, I think both of the people next to me refused their snacks on the way, so I was the only one eating, which I felt a little better about. And I could control my mask being on.
I got a little bit of practice at chewing behind a mask and also at doing this to drink. Which my other claim to fame on this is that while American Airlines has since March not been serving alcohol to anyone in coach on any flight, and federal regulations prohibit you from bringing your own alcohol on board, they are still on these cross-country flights in first class serving alcohol, and I did on the flight out avail myself of that once, so I can say I've consumed alcohol on an airplane in 2020, and I don't think a lot of people can say that.
Well, I can also say that, so... I
did in February. But
okay.
I did March, in March, so...
Yeah, I'm the odd man out.
Yep. Do we have anything else we want to say on airports before we move on? Or did we cover everything?
I think we've... Oh, yeah, no, the one other thing I wanted to cover was regarding travel quarantines, right? So when I flew at the end of June, New York was just starting to implement their quarantine rules, and Connecticut hadn't made rules yet, so that was no drama for me. I just went home as normal. By October, Connecticut had rules and had a form to fill out, so I did fill out the form. They apparently early on they were giving out paper forms, but by the time I was flying, it was basically just, hey, here's a QR code if you want to look up the form. Please fill it out on your phone. So I filled it out on my phone before I even got on the plane, and I had deliberately made my itinerary such that I would not be subject to quarantine upon returning, and I filled out the form as such, and once again, I was good to go when I got home, but I did have to fill out the form.
Yeah, ours was also online. I think they had an option for paper, but online meant I could do it while I was waiting for the airplane to taxi to the gate. So certainly I was going to avail myself of that. But my main experience I want to relate is on the way home from the time I got to the rental car facility, took the rental car bus to the airport, waited in the airport, got on my flight, then I got outside, was waiting for a bus. I had already at that point had a mask on for about 7+ hours. Then I still had to take the bus to get back to where my car was. All in all, I had a mask on for nearly 12 hours in a row, and I had a pretty bad headache by the end of that. They say it doesn't restrict oxygen flow. I can breathe, but it definitely restricted oxygen flow a little. And that was one of the most unpleasant reasons why I don't want to travel again until we're post-mask wearing.
On the subject of quarantining and stuff like that, did you guys have to get tested at any point? Or would
Not as a result of my travels. The
Yeah.
one time I got tested recently was unrelated to travel, and it did come back negative.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. Because I did get tested.
anyone
when
was
I got
concerned.
home. Yeah, I got tested when I got home from Michigan. Although that was more of a personal choice. But no, I didn't have to get tested on a mandatory basis as a result of flying. Yeah, so that's the story with that. I got the big thing shoved all the way up to the North Pole. So
Ooh.
that was fun.
Ooh.
Let me tell you something. You don't want to have that happen to you. So
Yeah, fortunately, my test did not go that deep. It was not really uncomfortable or unpleasant at all. It was, it felt no different than having someone pick your nose for you.
Mine was sort of halfway between those two extremes, because ours is the do your own, but please get way up there type. So I've taken the test twice, and it wasn't mandatory because I live in New Jersey. So both times I took it upon returning from flying because of the level of exposure I had overall, and I just felt better that way, having a definite result before I started interacting with people again. So coming back from flying, as I said, the flight home was relatively full, so I didn't feel right not getting a test after that. And then I took a long driving trip, which we'll get into that later, different topics. But again, it wasn't that I felt at any point I had been exposed. It was just the cumulative amounts of small exposure, and I felt it was best. No one in New Jersey would have enforced it, though.
Right, because New Jersey is more of an advisory instead of an actual rule, right?
Right. There's really no enforcement. You're supposed to get tested, but they can't fine or arrest you if you skip that.
Next topic, hotels. We've all had to stay in them at some point or other during our extended trips. So, I mean, there's a lot of the stuff I feel is the same with hotels. You still got a room and there was still a bed in it. So, that much of it was still the same. But there were some procedural things that were different.
Yeah, there were a couple of... I would say, in my experience, the largest difference is that fewer places had a free breakfast. That was the thing that was most common.
Yeah,
and missing. As a secondary thing, there generally weren't notepads in the rooms, pens in the rooms, stuff like that was generally not as common to find. But yeah, from the perspective of a normal traveler, how much does this actually affect your life? The only real thing is free breakfast.
So what hotel chains were you staying at?
I was all over the place. So
Okay.
So in the past few months, I've stayed at Hilton's, Choice Properties, Wyndham Properties. It really depended on the individual location as opposed to the chain.
Okay, so there's a whole cross section here. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, there's a cross section of.
Right. From my perspective, I usually stay mostly at Wyndham Properties. I have had a few stays at Best Western, and one stay at a Drury Inn. But yeah, in terms of breakfast, yeah, there were places that just weren't providing it. There were places that were, had it as a to-go bag only. There was one place that had a limited option that they would serve you. It wasn't a buffet. And then there were a few places that I stayed that actually were serving buffet breakfast as normal, which I just looked at and said, nope.
Yeah, there was one hotel I stayed at in of all places, Claypool Hill, Virginia, so extremely rural Western Virginia, they have the standard buffet. But anywhere else I was, that was if they were serving breakfast, it was they served you, or here's a bag.
Let's see. Places that I saw them actually serving breakfast like nothing out of the ordinary was going on. Battle Mountain, Nevada, and Fort Dodge, Iowa.
Yep, that would.
So
See that.
I did not notice that pattern in my travel. I went cross country, so I stayed in roughly 15, 16 hotels on that journey. I would say, I think actually all of them had plexiglass up at the front desk, so you're talking through that to the front desk person through the plexiglass. You hand everything through the tiny little slot or around the side, depending on how they have it set up. But that was pretty universal. The rooms, most of the rooms had the pad and pen. A few of them didn't, but I would say more than half did. Still, as far as breakfast goes, 4 or so of them didn't offer breakfast. Another 6 or 7 of them had limited breakfast things you could grab yourself, or 1 or 2 of them did give me a bag, but mostly it was, you can take a granola bar out of the fridge or yogurt or something. And then a few of them did have a buffet, but I wake up before the sunrise so that I maximize my daylight on the road, so I felt fine being the first person at the buffet in that case. So I didn't let that get to me, but as far as locations go, I was just as likely to have a buffet in California and no food in Oklahoma. There's really no pattern, and that surprised me a bit.
That's interesting, because at least in my experiences, the or urban, or shall I say, bluer the area, the less likely I was to be able to have hotel breakfast. That was a very stark difference. I mean, hotel staff, at least in October when I traveled, was pretty much universally wearing masks, but enforcement of a guest wearing mask was also dependent on the area's quote-unquote political meetings I found. So
I saw 0 enforcement of guests wearing masks at any location. For the most part, the hotel staff was not wearing masks. They were behind plexiglass, but even if they were out doing something, walking down the hallway, whatever, didn't matter where I was. There was pretty much no mask wearing, and I had to get used to the fact that this was just going to be a theme, and so I need to keep my distance from these people because I can't make the hotel staff wear masks. If their local jurisdiction isn't on them for that, what am I going to do? I can in that case.
And that's also part of why when I traveled in October, I tried to stay in Maryland and Virginia, which are enforcing masks on a statewide level. So I found hotels and places that are enforcing masks are usually better than hotels and places that are not, with the exception of Pennsylvania, which is its own beast.
Pennsylvania.
yeah, I mean, I found
that's the worst mask use I've seen so far. Actually, it's
the worst state in the union, so it makes sense.
I found it pretty hit or miss whether staff was wearing masks at the, and even it depended on the staff. There was one place I stayed where the person who checked me in was not wearing a mask, but the person who was at the desk the next morning was. So it's it's all about what's each individual doing, and no one's making them. And I at that point I figure, well, okay, rather than checking out, they have, a lot of them have places to drop your keys. You check in, you just you make it quick, you keep the exposure as brief as you can. One interesting experience I had was that there were several places I stayed that had the place they wanted to drop your keys was basically a tub of hand sanitizer. But the one funny experience I had was I showed up at the front desk on my way out with the key still in the little paper sleeve they give it to you in, and I was kind of like, all right, I don't want to dump the paper sleeve in there, so I go to put the key in there, and then the person at the front desk, sees me doing this and says with the paper about the paper slip, oh, I can take that from you, and just grabs it out of my hand. And so I'm thinking, okay, great. Well, your tub of hand sanitizer just accomplished a whole lot there.
Yeah.
I saw a question about parties and conferences. I actually did see a large unmasked party at a hotel I stayed in June in New Jersey. Hotel staff wasn't really doing anything, which was a bit surprising being New Jersey, but there are still parties and certain people still won't wear masks, so
Where was
Princeton.
Yeah, I'm surprised.
You would not be surprised if you found out the what type of people they were, but if that gives you any hints, but it was. But
The
yeah,
hotel wouldn't enforce it. I'm a little surprised to hear that in an area like Princeton.
Yeah, I was surprised, but this is a demographic of people who has had issues with mask wearing across Northeast, so I wasn't surprised, but it was a tad. But I will say I took the stairs instead of hiding in the elevator with them.
Yeah, I did a lot of that too.
Most of the places I've stayed have not had elevators, so that resolves that. But yeah, I have not encountered any large unmasked gatherings at hotels in my travels this year. They've all seemed to be fairly kind of. I mean, I've certainly encountered guests not wearing masks, but not in huge groups, in ordinary sized groups to be staying in a room together.
Yeah, so these are some of my pictures of my hotel stays during the summer. They put out signs and they put out, stickers on the floor like you see in this picture, and they have the plexiglass at the front counter, and I believe this was in Charleston. You got your hand sanitizer stations in the lobby. This particular Hampton Inn did have the coffee stand like they usually have, with no restrictions on it. Most of the hotels I stayed in did have elevators, so I got to become familiar with signs like this. Most locations had policies similar to this. Two-person maximum or one party at a time.
That was pretty common across hotel hotel brands. I found that everywhere I stayed had either a two-person or a party maximum.
And not enforced ever.
And not enforced, correct. So if there were other people, again, take the stairs.
Yeah.
I can tell you that at the I saw this generally where there were elevators in a hotel. They had something like that. The local mall here where I live does not have any restrictions on elevator occupancy. And that actually also represents the one time this year since March that I've been in a hotel in an elevator with more than one other person, and it was funny because my wife and I got in this elevator as we were on our way out, and this other guy who was behind us was like, "Oh, do you mind if I come in?" And I knew we were just going up a few floors; it was not going to be very. I waved him in. He had a mask on, so did we. I didn't think it was a big deal, but I did think it was interesting that he asked. He didn't just walk in. Some interesting etiquette there.
Yeah, on that topic, I'm in an elevator almost every day because my apartment building has them. There is no set policy, but people have been generally keeping it here to 1 or 2 people, and there aren't enough people here right now that it makes any issues, but people who generally ask if, hey, can I go in? Yes. And
I had noticed in my travels, the hotels were a lot less occupied than normal, so a lot of the time this wasn't an issue, but hotel guests generally were no change from existing behavior. Whether or not they were wearing a mask, they would use the elevator if they wanted to. They would. Someone mentioned the pool in chat. One of the hotels actually had an open pool, so it was very much people are going to do what they're used to. No one ever asked, "Oh, should I wait?" If I was in a hotel lobby and there were already 2 other people, a party of 3 was liable to walk in and make it very crowded. There was never any sense of waiting one at a time in that sense.
Yeah, as it got later in the year, more stuff became available, in my experience. So, like in June, there weren't any pools open. But in September and October, there were pools open. Not all of them, but there were more open than there were earlier in the year. So
right, and some places had them open, but maximum number of guests at once, or you need to reserve a time slot.
Yeah, like there was one hotel I stayed at where you had to actually reserve a time. Like you had a 38-minute window that you could reserve for however many people, and they were doing it that way. So, different locations had different policies and different ways of handling capacity and stuff like that. But, we mentioned that there were, the breakfast buffet stuff. Here's what I have up on the screen is what was pretty typical at Holiday Inn Express and at Hilton properties that normally would serve in-person breakfast service. They would give you these breakfast bags, and it varied depending on where you stayed, but this was basically the gist of it. They would give you basically a goodie bag in the morning, and if you were fortunate enough to claim your prize in the morning when you left, this is typically what you got.
Breakfast cake. What the heck was that?
Breakfast cake.
I assume that's one of those things that they would used to give out at school that is not quite a muffin.
I think it's 70% sugar and 30% fat. The one thing I noticed more during COVID than before was yogurt. Everywhere, if there was one item they had, it was yogurt. And the other items varied.
Because you don't need to buffet that, you can just have it grab and go and not have multiple people touching the same stuff, which is the thing that's trying to be avoided here.
You have to refrigerate it, though, which a lot of these other things, you could just keep them in cupboards, so a little surprising. And normally most of the places I stay don't have yogurts when I'm going around for breakfast. So They're actually shifting for some reason.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a hotel breakfast that didn't have yogurt. So,
Well, they usually have it in the little refrigerator off to the side, out
Yeah.
of view.
Usually they have eggs there. Places I stay don't have yogurt usually. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I just did not use hotel breakfasts this year. At least, from March onward, I did earlier in the year. My breakfasts while traveling have mostly consisted of having a bag of Cheerios in the car that I can just chomp on as I'm getting underway, and stop and grab some milk or some chocolate milk somewhere to wash it down. Or if I've wanted something more substantial, I've gotten takeout from a place like IHOP or Denny's or what have you, and found a quiet spot to sit and eat it.
Yeah. Well, why don't we talk about restaurants and dining and stuff like that? Because again, like the in-person stuff was kind of out the window this year. So, I don't know. How'd you guys get around that? Was it just a matter of, like, drive-through stuff? Or, just going at off hours of the day? Like,
So when I'm on road trips, I normally really don't do much in the way of dine-in because, as a matter of making time, I usually like to just grab stuff I can eat while driving. I think the big thing from my case that's been different this year, other than the stop at IHOP being eaten in a parking space rather than inside, is that I normally, prior to this year, never really went through the drive-through. Mostly just because whenever stopping to get food, I would want to go inside just to use the bathroom. This year, a lot of places only have the drive-thru open, or I've just kind of looked at it as, well, if their bathroom isn't open, why even go inside? So I've used a lot more drive-thrus than I normally would. But then otherwise, basically proceeded the same way from there. That I'm eating by McDonald's or whatever as I'm on the road.
I haven't noticed places have closed bathrooms. In general, if they allowed you inside, which most restaurants when I traveled in September still allowed you inside, and certainly Texas, I think, was July 4th weekend. No, it was Memorial Day weekend, but certainly they were allowed inside. So my restaurant experience has been relatively normal. The only difference is instead of sitting down to enjoy it, I'm generally getting it to go so that I'm spending as little time as possible there. But otherwise, it was. But most of them, just about everywhere I went had takeout. I may have eaten in once, but the bathrooms were open. There were people dining in at many of these places where the state allowed it.
Yeah, I can tell you that in California, a lot of places have their bathrooms closed. I also know from my experience that at least all of the locations of Blake's Lottaburger, which is a chain that's mostly in New Mexico, none of them have their bathrooms open. And I think that probably was just a chain-wide decision. So, I have encountered this. It is a thing.
Yeah, as far as my experiences here, I traditionally on trips do lunch as a fast food and a dinner as a dine-in at a local restaurant. This year has been all fast food, all drive-through. So before this year, I had actually never used a drive-through at all. So
really, wow.
So I have used a drive-through far more this year than ever before. So on my trips, I generally would get drive-through food, and for lunch, I would eat it. I would parking lot and eat in the car. For dinner, I would take it back to my hotel room and eat it that way.
I know in California, two places I remember that I was close enough to the hotel that I just got food and walked back to the hotel. So I wasn't testing the bathrooms. I'm trying to remember the third place, whether I probably had done the same thing. I was probably just looking for takeout at that point. And I think that motivation, I certainly, as a foodie, I'm not on vacation if I'm stuck to fast food. So I was still finding the local joints, different cuisines as I traveled. All the restaurants were still open. There's actually one interesting travel experience I had. I was going to stop at a certain town in eastern Oklahoma on my ride back, and both of the hotels were closed and both of the restaurants were closed in that town. I ended up having to detour 15 miles down to a different town where that wasn't the case, and I was able to find one hotel that was open. But there was a bit of panic when I realized that nothing was open and there really weren't any other towns of any size near there, so I had to just hope that there was a small town near there that worked.
And is this with you usually showing up saying you got a room available?
Yeah, I wasn't making reservations. And on my cross-country trip anyway, I was finding that on the way out, I was consistently ahead of where I thought I would be, and so reservations would have held me back in that case. And not having a reservation meant if I made better time, I could do something more the next day with the extra time I had.
Right. I mean, I operate on a lot of the same principle when I'm driving day after day, except, I've done the just show up and say you got a room thing in the past. I've moved away from it. I usually will now make a reservation, a couple hours before I'm done driving. So at that point, I have a pretty good idea of where I'm making it to that day.
Yeah, I wasn't at any point concerned that I was going to run into a place being full. I just had to make sure that it was still open at all. But I didn't have any problems other than that one, and every hotel I went to was open other than that one day and had plenty of room. Actually, there was one other day when one hotel didn't, but the other one was uncrowded and just fine, so no issues.
All right.
I don't know what was going on in the one, but if you're full, I don't want to stay there anyway right now, so that was okay.
You don't want to double book, no.
Well, I don't want to be the last person in either.
Yeah. I did experiment with restaurant dine-in this summer, and it depended on where you were, but you had your 25 to 50% indoor capacity, and tables were blocked off or taped off or whatever. You had signs up like this one. And what the rule that I followed was I went very early in the day, because my theory on it has always been that the cleanest time of the day for any establishment is right when they open. So you figure that they're going to open the doors and wipe everything down right before people start to show up. So if I'm like the first person through the door and I get out of there, relatively early, then, my risk of exposure is significantly reduced, as opposed to if I went at like noon or like in the evening. So I kind of followed that logic for this, and here are some pictures of that. This is an outdoor patio in this slide. Obviously outdoor dining became a big thing this year, so you had a lot of scenes like this at restaurants that you didn't see before, but this was all part of adjusting to the times, right? So there's that. They even had some interesting rules at, you know, at cash out at the end. So, one place I ate at in the Rochester, New York area had this sign up. They wouldn't let you go to the front counter to pay. You had to pay the waitress at the table, which was interesting. I'm not sure why they put that rule in place.
Mixing, they don't want people crowding the cash register, I guess.
I guess, yeah.
I've seen the opposite, where they want you to pay at the register so that they can get the tables cleaned between guests or something.
Yeah, I mean, this is the sort of thing that it seems like there's going to be a lot of preference of the establishment involved, that, you know, there's going to be pros and cons to doing it either way.
And then a lot of places replaced their traditional menus with paper menus that were printed, and in a lot of cases they double as placemats.
Yes. I've seen a lot of that. I've seen a few places that only provided menus on request and had you scan a QR code with your phone.
I've definitely seen that.
Yep.
I have not dined in at a restaurant since before any restrictions started going into place, so...
Really, you haven't done it since then?
I as far as I see it, there's no need. You know, it's easier to just not.
Yeah, but I have exactly twice. Once indoors, and that basically said never again, because they seated everyone in the restaurant in the same section of the restaurant. The other was an outdoor thing in October, where we were seated far away from everybody, so it was excellent. But,
yeah, the closest experience I've had to dine in this year was on my itinerary out in June, when I connected through Charlotte. I had a 5-hour layover there, so naturally I grabbed food while I was there. And I noted that they actually had the food court open with no tables blocked off, and a lot of people were just sitting around right there in the food court eating. And so I did not sit down and eat there. What I ended up doing was I ended up going towards where my eventual gate for my flight out was going to be, finding an empty gate and sitting down and taking my mask off to eat, where I was well over 6 feet from anyone else. And you know, I was also there with my sanitizer, wiping the arms of the chair down before I sat down. I was like, all right, I got to make sure I'm good here. But
here's another example of blocking off tables and booths and stuff like that. We use chairs for that, apparently.
yeah, it works.
Oh yeah.
I've seen it all.
yeah, I've seen a lot of
Pieces of paper to tape to chairs to making it look like all of their dirty stuff from the tables they're bussing was piled up at the tables they weren't. I've seen everything.
Yeah. And then as far as condiments are concerned, at a lot of
all
places
single serve.
you either had to request them or they would give them to you in these little single-use containers like you see here.
What is that? Is that soy sauce?
It's maple syrup.
Maple syrup. Is it actually maple syrup, or is it breakfast syrup?
I guess it depends on the person, but they call it maple syrup.
It doesn't depend. It either is maple syrup or it isn't.
Well, they call it maple syrup.
Oh, okay.
So that's what I'm going with.
Okay.
So, but you know, like you saw a lot of stuff like this, I'm sure, on the road.
I didn't. They mostly had condiments out at the tables like usual. So a few places didn't have them and would bring them if you asked, but many places that I've seen still had the usuals right there.
Yeah. Yeah, again, that's something that I think was rolled out gradually again as the year went along. at least in my experience.
My restaurant dining experience has been on and off all year, and pretty consistently, I've seen most restaurants that have dine-in are pretty much business as usual.
Yeah, I mean, there's a local diner here in the neighborhood that I went into to grab takeout from last week. That yeah, you know, they have a set of table and chairs outside in what used to be a parking spot. Kind of sad. Nobody was using it. It was kind of cold anyway. Mm-hmm. Inside, you know, they have. This is not a big place. It has a counter with a row of bar stools, and then it has one row of booths. So with the stools at the counter, they had a pair of them blocked off, and then a pair of them open, alternating, going down the counter. And then the booths, they had every booth open, but they had plexiglass barriers between them. So, you know, that was their way of kind of handling that, since they really would have no capacity if they had to close every other booth. I think they had 4 booths total.
What else we got on restaurants? Anything good?
Support your local restaurants. They need you more than ever. I'm consistently eating out, though not on vacation. Twice a week, I take food out. I tip as if I'm eating in, because we just had one place closed in my town. That's our first COVID closure all year. And it wasn't a restaurant. It was a gift store, but I want all these places to survive. I like all these places. So I would normally eat in if I could. And so I'm going to tip until we're all allowed to eat in like normal again, and then go from there. I encourage people to take out and have your own dining out in your own safe area.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that ties into a broader point here, is that we're fighting. This becomes an economic battle as well as a public health one, and I think for people who are fortunate enough to still have their regular livelihood, I think it's important to, again, give your support where you can, because there are people that need it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I know I have to locations in my general area. Yeah, everybody's taking a big hit. So,
Mm-hmm.
we got what? I got other pictures here. What else do I got here? Have any of you slept in your cars during this?
No.
During this year, I have.
I could not say I would do that normally.
Yeah.
Well,
very difficult for me to sleep not lying down.
Well, this isn't normal, though. We know that.
I had that as a last resort, but never became necessary.
I did it on 2 occasions. This is actually on. Actually, I did it twice in the same spot. Believe it or not. This is.
Like you're a return customer.
I was a return customer, yeah, and I wasn't kicked out on either occasion.
Okay.
This was the Welcome Center on Interstate 81 southbound entering West Virginia. That's where this was.
Yeah, that sounds like the sort of place they wouldn't mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I know there are some states that are very big on no overnight parking.
South Carolina being one.
Yeah.
North Carolina being another, which really screwed up the one time I planned to sleep in my car.
Walmart parking lot.
Well, yeah, that's where I ended up parking. But
yeah.
I did that in Australia, actually, years ago. I slept in the first night I slept in my car in a Walmart parking lot. Because by the time I was in a car, it was well past midnight, and so I said, I'm only going to get a few hours of sleep. It's not worth paying for it.
yeah, so my car has enough room where I can just recline the back seat and that just turns into one flat, area. There's enough room for me to hide back there.
I guess it also helps if you're in your own car that you drove from home, because you also then have the ability to bring, blankets and pillows with you. Whereas if you've flown somewhere first, that's kind of tricky to do.
Right. Yeah.
Use your clothes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, on those first couple of trips to West Virginia, I spent a night in the car. Why? Because I didn't want to interact with other people as much as possible. I even brought my own food. I would, like, on Thursday and Friday before, I cooked up a bunch of food and put it in containers, and so I had that for a couple of days to eat along the way. So I wasn't stopping at restaurants or anything like that. I don't know, I thought it went pretty well. And then as the year went along and things eased up a bit, then I gradually worked the more traditional stuff back into the rotation. But for these first couple of weekends, that's kind of what I did. I live to tell about it. What else?
Before we get away from places to stay, I will share that there was one time this year when I was staying in a hotel with someone else. And so that time, we were staying in a town that had 8 or 9 different hotels. I went hotel by hotel, and I walked out of the first 7 because the staff wasn't wearing masks, and we stayed in the last one where they were. And I said, for myself, I wouldn't care so much, but if I've got someone else with me, the importance is their comfort and safety, not just mine. So I'm not going to take a risk on their behalf. So it's where anyone who's considering traveling, if you're doing it alone, take your own risks. If you're traveling with someone else, be safe. Be safer than you might want to.
Mm-hmm.
Consider your travel companion's risk level.
Right.
Not just your own, right? Scott brought up road meet park lunches. Do we want to touch on that? Because the road meet changed quite a bit this year, or the idea of it, or like what we did during it.
I went to a road meet on my one vacation, so it is actually a relevant topic, but we didn't eat at that one.
Yeah. Because usually the road meets that we go to, there's a lunch beforehand, and then there's a driving tour and all that. Well, a lot of that looked a lot different at times this year. The outdoor gathering became a thing. Everybody bringing their own food. I never actually went on a road meet tour this year, so I can't speak to that. But I hear that there were elements of that were different as well.
Everyone in their own cars. Yep.
Yeah, which also makes the logistics a bit hairy, because you now can't stop at places with limited parking.
Yeah.
If you got 15 people in 15 cars, it doesn't work.
We haven't had those kind of crowds this year.
Or are you? I guess, yeah, it's true. Even if it's 10 people in 10 cars, I think we've gotten close to 10.
Yeah. And fortunately, so far, logistics have not been an issue at any of the meets I've been to. I haven't heard of them being an issue at other meets, but anyone in our audience who's been to a couple other ones, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, and this might be an unpopular opinion, but I thought the park lunches went pretty well. In some cases, a lot better than the normal in-restaurant lunches, because sometimes those have a lot. Because sometimes the worst part of the meat is the restaurant, so we didn't have that.
There have been cases where it's taken a while for everyone to get their checks paid.
I'm still going to disagree with you, though, because when everyone's eating separately outdoors, especially right now with social distancing, people are scattered around the parking lot, not really talking. You can go from person to person, but there's no group dynamic. And even without COVID, I feel like that would still be the case. If everyone's bringing their own, people will arrive. They'll be sort of eating off to the side. When everyone's in a restaurant, there's a sense of gathering, and I go to these road meets because the people I see there are my friends, so I want to spend the time with them. These bring your owns are lasting about 20 minutes, and as soon as everyone's there, we leave. And lunches usually last an hour and a half, 2 hours. There's map trading. There's just catching up with people. So I would not continue this trend going forward.
Corp lunch at the Utica meet was an hour and a half, and that had the pretty normal map trading and conversation. It just didn't have the time waiting around for checks.
Yeah, I think that part of the other limitation you see is that because people need to stay apart, you would probably have more conversation if people were sitting next to each other eating, as opposed to, here and there, and I don't know. I mean, I think it's an option to keep on the table. I don't think that, it should be the way it's done going forward, but I also don't think, it should be crumpled up and thrown in the garbage as soon as it's no longer necessary either.
Yeah, I mean, this will make some towns better for a road meet, because there are places that I have thought of as being good for a meet, but there aren't really any good cope restaurants there. So if you don't have to hurry about finding a place that I could hold 20 people, it's...
So we had one road meet at I think it was the Delaware Rest area.
Yes.
And so
we did, yes.
That's sort of a hybrid. All the food was there, but we weren't sitting down. It was still people bring what they want from the various places. Or actually, no, I took orders for that. I remember that.
You brought subs. I remember that.
Yeah. But everyone had
some
cheese
people
sticks.
brought their own.
Yeah.
But there was some group dynamic, but it still didn't last as long as a restaurant normally would. And for me, the people are more important than the roads at this point. So I'd rather spend more time at lunch.
I think the upside to the meetup in a service plaza or in a parking lot too is that you can less disruptively mingle too. If you want to go around and talk to different people, you can. Whereas when you're in a restaurant, once you're seated at the table, I know that some people don't follow this, but they probably should. That you probably should just stay in your seat, because you make the wait staff life difficult if you don't. They don't remember where you were when, if you're in a different place when your food comes than where you were when you placed the order, you just confuse everything.
So you guys don't think that the general concept of the road meet will change long term?
The general concept, no, but this might make for some more variation in how people decide to host them. You may start to see some people only hosting park meets, and some people will hold on to the restaurant meets.
It has introduced more options, that people didn't consider before. So I do think that there will be more variability going forward. I hope that the classic style that we've gotten used to over the years sticks around, and that doesn't go away. I don't see that going away. I don't think it's going away either. But you will see more different options, I think, in the future.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because in some places the standard format has gotten a little overplayed, and introducing changes would allow us to revisit some places we have previously held meets, or
So with restaurants out of the way, how about outdoor spots like parks. I know that we like to do. Some of us are hikers and stuff like that. We're into that kind of stuff. Um, this bald eagle wants to tell you to keep 6 feet apart.
Yeah, but I will speak from my experiences on this because I'm probably the most active outdoors person in the group. I hike probably every week, and when I'm traveling, it's like every day. So, I mean, I will say how people act on the trail or in parks entirely dependent on where you are. Like in the Hudson Valley, where I am right now, in New Jersey, even in Virginia, people are very good about if somebody comes up on the trail, mask goes on.
Yeah.
Or they'll try and stay 6+ feet away. When I stayed at, when I stopped at a Cumberland Gap National Park back in October, that was not the case. I did not see a single other person there with masks, and I had to really go out of my way to keep the 6-foot distance because, again, this is Kentucky, and people in Kentucky aren't taking it as
Say no more.
seriously as some of us.
So when I did the Keystone Arches, everyone I saw on the trail was not wearing masks. Some of them walked towards the side, some of them just didn't care. On my recent cross-country trip, Wednesday, November 11th is a free national park day, and so I spent the entire day going everywhere in Arizona other than the Grand Canyon. And regardless of how many people were at each spot, first of all, it was not very crowded at any of them. And the Grand Canyon may have been, but the others weren't. But people did wear masks, and they did put them on if I walked by. Even the most crowded of these, their mask wearing was very compliant. And I think the growing uptick by that point, we were in the beginning of the current surge, I think had enough people concerned that the ones who were showing up cared about it. And so the compliance was excellent all day long.
Yeah, and that's another thing too that I have seen. You know, when I made my trip in June, for most places I was, I usually was the only person who wasn't a staff member who walked into anywhere wearing a mask. I had some construction workers in a truck stop in Utah even actively making fun of me for the fact that I was wearing a mask, which I just ignored them. But that was in June. I can tell you that by later in the year there were more people that were wearing masks because I think it made a big difference that in June in a lot of places the attitude was still this was a New York City problem and a California problem. It's not our problem. And by later in the year people had kind of realized, oh no, yeah, actually it is your problem too. You just had to wait your turn.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Some places like Harper's Ferry in West Virginia limited the amount of guests by limiting the amount of parking available.
Yeah, that's the standard practice here in New York. Most state parks here and several other parks have capped parking at half capacity by blocking off every other spot. So if you don't show up 30 minutes after opening, you're SOL.
Yeah. You gotta get there early, right?
Gotta get there early.
Outdoor gatherings in open spaces, again, stuff like this was pretty typical. This guy here looks pretty angry.
Yes, he does.
So, we did the best we could to adjust, and
where was this picture taken?
this is in Maryland.
Okay. All right, yeah.
Yes,
I don't think Anthony was here for this.
I was not. That was the day that I was flying out to St. Louis.
Okay. Okay.
That right was
This was a birthday party, not a road meet.
Yeah. Well, I remember that day, and I also remember that I was initially considering, going to Maryland for that, and spending a night in a hotel for it, and having that be, my first toe in the water to, okay, I'm going to spend the night somewhere away from home. And I then kind of decided that you know what, no, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go big. And so I flew to St. Louis and drove to California from St. Louis instead.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I did that when I did, because if I had waited to do that until a month later, like I was originally thinking about, I would have I would have had a little bit more trouble dancing around quarantine rules. Whereas by doing it when I did, I didn't have any trouble with it. So, I think I made the right decision on timing there.
Yeah, you really lucked out with how you timed that.
I'm glad I traveled when I did. If I had been planning to leave 2 weeks later, I would not have felt comfortable taking that trip. I would have liked to have left two weeks earlier, for that matter, but the road meet that I was attending was November 14th, so it was a question of, do I go down to North Carolina and across, or do I go across and down? I chose early, and yeah, I have no intention to travel at all until the spike passes.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I'm kind of looking at what's going on and going, yeah, let's see where this goes. It's not, now it doesn't seem like a good time.
Yeah, I'm at a point where I will probably travel at some point in the next month, but by travel, I mean somewhere 2-3 hours from home, as opposed to several states over, which is a very different thing, I think.
Right. I mean, the other problem I have right now is that at this point, every state other than Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, and Hawaii requires a quarantine or a test out upon return to Connecticut if I spend more than 24 hours in it. So that also kind of makes it a little bit more of a logistical headache to go anywhere. I mean, I can go places and then just say, okay, fine, I'll get tested and I got to sit at home until I get my results. But that just adds a level of inconvenience to it. It might be easier to wait a little bit if I can. I don't know. We'll see what happens. I'm not going anywhere until after the new year, definitely anyway. At this point, yeah. But I don't yet have a firm decision on where or when my next foray will be. Other than that, I am pretty sure it will be before we're out of this.
Yeah. Well, and also the testing out of it is also an inconvenience for people. People go away and then they got to sit at home. They don't necessarily have the ability to work from home.
Right, which I do. I actually, one of my most amusing things this year has been watching people trying to figure out work from home, because I've been doing it for years, so I like to say I was doing it before it was cool. It's just normal for me.
Yeah.
A lot of things you do aren't cool. It's okay.
This was a very empty Detroit riverfront on Labor Day weekend. I'm pretty sure that on a normal, pre-pandemic holiday weekend, it wouldn't be this empty.
It was the Rensen.
Yeah. Definitely wasn't that busy there. What else we got? I mentioned the National Park Service signs like this one here. 6 feet away. West Virginia is not the most compliant state when it comes to mask wearing, but I kind of knew that was going to be the case going in.
I will say that in October, though, people in West Virginia were actually not that bad with masks. It wasn't nearly as bad as Kentucky or parts of Pennsylvania.
Oklahoma.
What percentage do you think about of people were wearing masks?
In West Virginia, my experience 50-50, maybe a little better.
Okay, so that's about the same as it was when I was there in August.
Kentucky was, I would say, under 10.
Oklahoma was under 1. I doubled the number of people in that state wearing masks.
Those states I have happened to this year. So.
Yeah, Kentucky. I did not leave my car except for the hike. I did not see a single other person wearing a mask properly in the state.
Has either of the Dakotas this year?
Yeah, I saw lots of chin masks in Kentucky, but I did not see any proper masks.
That's as good as no mask.
Exactly.
Keeping the score.
Yeah, 50-50 was... You guys are saying it was 50-50. I think that was better than when I was there in June and July. So...
Yeah. I saw more than 50, and other than Oklahoma, generally, masks... At least people were trying. They would slip, and they wouldn't really notice it, but most people had them.
Yeah, I would say Virginia was surprisingly good with masks. Even outside of northern Virginia, it was probably at least 75-80%, which surprised me a bit, but certainly not in a bad way.
I think, do we want to touch on gas stations?
Exact same as normal usually. I mean, it's...
Yeah, I mean, I think, right, a lot of people have been concerned about gas stations because of the need to touch the pump and everything. I think, my solution to that generally has been, I'll just use hand sanitizer when I get back in the car. This way I have cleaned my hands off.
Yeah.
The biggest issue I've seen at gas stations is that some I've been to have had the bathrooms closed. But outside of that, it's been pretty...
Yeah, I mean, truck stops seem to all have their bathrooms open as normal. Smaller gas stations often don't have public restrooms anyway. But yes, I certainly will note that in general that, right, especially with using the drive-throughs instead of going inside restaurants, I've contributed to the local nitrogen cycle more frequently this year on trips than I would have otherwise. Which, for guys, if you're in rural areas, it works okay. It may not work so well for everyone everywhere.
Yeah, my experience with gas stations, I brought a bunch of handkerchiefs, really, but just cloth, so I would not touch the handle with my hands. I would touch it with the cloth, and then every couple of days I would rotate that one into the laundry and not touch it again, but made sure that it had an inside and outside so I could see which side I was grabbing the handle with, and so it always, anything I was coming in contact with was not direct contact with my skin. As far as bathrooms, I generally found them open. I think there was only 1 or 2 places where they were closed when I was looking for them, and one of them looked like it was closed for a lot longer than a few months.
Yeah, as weird as it sounds, the main place I've actually encountered closed bathrooms is here in New York. So
yeah, that doesn't really sound weird.
Oh, it's not. I actually had a lot of issues on Thursday. I didn't open up public restrooms because seemingly every gas station along 9W had them closed.
Yeah, well, I think you see more of that in states that have stricter rules, partly because, they start saying, well, okay, if you need to do this and this to make sure you keep your restrooms extra clean, and a lot of places have kind of just said, no, it's not worth it, just close it, tell everyone sorry for the inconvenience. Whereas in states that don't have those kinds of requirements, they just, don't say, okay, fine, leave it open, whatever. I kind of look at it as, all right, well, I'm going to have a mask on when I go in there anyway. I'm probably not going to be in there for very long, hopefully. And that's at least, when it's common restrooms. This actually does remind me of another interesting thing I noted this year was a public restroom at a National Park Service facility that was a single occupancy latrine that still had a sign on the door listing out the restroom regulations, and it said, please wear a mask inside. So I put on a mask to go in, and then when I got inside and saw what it was, I took it right off. I was like, oh, there's nobody else in here. There's not going to be anyone else in here. They just, standard sign.
All right, so we covered gas stations. I don't know. What else we got, guys? What else do you want to bring up? Any other grievances or issues you want to take?
Has anyone traveled by public transportation since March?
Actually, yes, I have. Yep, I have.
All right, so that's a subject that some of us can contribute to.
Yeah. I've taken transit here in Albany twice since it started, both of which were to pick up and return a rental car for my October trip. As far as differences inside, the main difference was that the driver of the bus was sitting up behind a plexiglass shield.
Mm.
Outside of that, they had signs in there saying to try and maintain social distancing. There wasn't anything blocking off seats or anything.
Yep.
People were generally wearing masks.
Yeah. I mean, I have not been on traditional public transit since March, but, I can tell you, locally I've seen train station parking lots a lot emptier than they normally would be.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure that's going to be true broadly.
Yeah, I've been seeing, I've been in the Hudson Valley a few times, and generally Metro North stations have been about 5 to 10% full when they're usually full on a weekday, so there is still a large drop-off in people taking a transit into work.
Yeah, I know. I had an experience with the rental car shuttle bus in Phoenix where, they had the driver behind I think it was more like, plastic drop cloth rather than plexiglass, but they had the driver barricaded off. They also were doing this interesting thing where they were only letting a certain number of people, I want to say it was 10, it might not have been exactly 10, but it was somewhere about there, on each bus, and if you weren't, and I actually had to wait for the next one because they actually had a staff member there counting and enforcing this rule, and I found this almost a little bit amusing because it's like, okay, fine, I got a 5-minute bus ride where I'm not allowed to be more than one of 10 people, and I'm about to get on a 5-hour flight with 100 other people.
Yeah, that sounds...
Like, wait a minute. Someone didn't think this through. But
I noticed no such restriction on the rental car shuttle I took. People, and I've taken buses too, because to fly out of Newark, I park and then take a bus. And both on buses, nobody sat next to me. People were generally one per row at least, which is better than usual. Yep. This being New Jersey, most people were wearing masks properly. Nobody was not wearing a mask on the bus. In Texas, the rental car shuttle, everyone had masks on. All the travelers were doing it correctly. As you said, plexiglass. But that was not the unsafe part of my journey. Really, it was the flight back that, in that case, that felt the most unsafe, more than being on any of the buses. Although the cumulative effect of being in a closed vehicle with numerous other people did get to me after a bit.
Yeah, it didn't really occur to me on the Michigan trip until the return flight home because, as I said, the outbound flight was just about empty. The rental car bus service was pretty empty. Like there were maybe 3 other people on the bus besides me on both occasions, and yeah, so like the surprising moment for me came when I was getting on the flight back to Albany and every seat was taken. That was the only time when I was kind of a little concerned about it. But other than that, my whole experience with travel this year has been generally good in all aspects. I was nervous about what I might encounter on the first couple of trips out. I think that we all were kind of a little unsure of what we would encounter along the way. But I think we all kind of, adjusted to what was around us, and we all made the most of this year. And I think that's really complimentary of you guys. I think we did a great job of making the most of what we had.
Yeah, I had an interesting experience actually in St. Louis where I got there. It was 9 o'clock at night local time. I walked out to the curb where the rental car shuttles are, and mind you, I'd flown into St. Louis before, so I knew exactly where to go. But I got there, and I wasn't the only person that got off this plane, but I got there and there was absolutely nobody else waiting at the curb for the shuttle bus, and I saw they actually had a sign up saying, hey, if you need a shuttle bus, call this number. And so I was kind of like, oh. So I actually, I was dialing them, and the phone was ringing when I saw the bus pulling up. So like, oh, okay. And so then I then had the bus to myself, going to the rental car place, which, at this point, right? It's so I have Avis preferred, so I get to skip the counter and just go straight to the car in the assigned space. That's convenient in normal times. It's helpful in pandemic times because it avoids an indoor exposure. I had it. Honestly, it was the easiest rental car experience I've ever had. Got right in the car. No crowds, no drama. Pulled right up to the exit gate. They were basically having it like, hey, don't even hand me your license. Just show it to me, and the lady gave me a quick thumbs up and said go.
Yeah, that's what
So
they
I was like, wow,
that was did that for me.
That's about how it was when I rented a car here in Albany back in October. Walked in. Show my license. I had the keys and contract in my hands. And then 60 seconds of us stepping inside. And I was on my way.
I did not have that experience whatsoever in Texas. They had closed the booth they closed their normal office. They closed the booth in the garage, so it was 2 people running back and forth, and a scattered, I can't call it a line, but there were 5 or 6 different groups of us waiting at 10 p.m., about 20 feet apart from each other in different areas in the parking lot. Employees racing cars to different spaces around the lots, and everyone was taking like 20 minutes plus to get their car. It was a nightmare, completely uncoordinated. And this was in May in a state that I'm sure was slow to adopt any sort of policies, but that it was not at all a smooth experience, and much worse than if we had just been able to go inside and quickly do the exchange.
Yeah, I think that pretty much covers the rental car aspect of it. I don't know, guys. You think we covered everything, or what else? What else do you want to throw in there?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. We got hotels, flying, rental cars, restaurants, outdoor spaces.
Anyone have to pay a toll?
Well,
I have Easy Pass, so that was exactly the same.
I did cross a normally tolled bridge for free because they had suspended toll collection.
For free, really?
Yeah, so the Fort Madison toll bridge between Iowa and Illinois, it's owned by BNSF Railway, and it's cash only. They don't accept any sort of electronic collection. And I was prepared to pay. I didn't know they had suspended tolls, but I pulled up to the booth and I saw they just had a sign saying we've. So I said, "Oh, okay."
Wow. I'm pretty sure they didn't suspend toll collection on the Dingman's Bridge in New Jersey, right?
Well,
Excuse
I think
me, I'm heading to church.
I think the thing is that Dingman's Ferry is entirely dependent on toll revenue to stay in business. The bridge is the business. BNSF Railway makes a lot of money hauling freight. They don't need the toll revenue from that bridge.
Yeah.
So it's easy for they could make it free all the time if they wanted to, but why would they when they can charge people?
Yeah.
Much of an effect on their bottom line either, because that toll may pay the salary of the people taking tolls and not much more.
Yeah, I want to say it's like $2 each way. It's not a lot.
Yeah, I've been paying tolls electronically since I've owned a car, but I know that most agencies, at least in our part of the country, did go to cashless collection, at least temporarily. Some have since gone back to it. Others have made it permanent. But I would say that toll collection is a story for another time.
Yeah, that's not anything most of us here can really say much about, because our experiences haven't been that different from usual.
We all
have Easy Pass. Nothing changed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Anthony did have that one experience.
Yeah,
so that's what I was going for there. That in our travels, have we encountered tolls outside this area that were collected differently? So they just said forget it.
Yeah, I also got into Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park for free because they had suspended collecting fees for, I guess, similar reasons.
I had heard that about the national parks, but I still timed it to go on the actually free days so I wouldn't have to feel like I was cheating or worrying if I was supposed to check in somewhere or not.
Most national parks resumed collecting fees in July or August, but
I had heard that at a lot of them, the people just weren't in the booths and you could just drive through.
Yeah, I've heard this experience from others as well, that a lot of places have just kind of been declining to staff and check. I am not usually in the habit of pulling into paid national parks a lot, so I haven't necessarily noticed or seen, but I went to Black Canyon of the Gunnison partly because I had checked on their website before going, and it explicitly said on the website that they weren't charging, and I said, okay, well, now's my chance, because normally you figure some of these national parks cost a lot of money to get into, and it's it's worthwhile if you're going to spend a while there. But I'm on a road trip. I'm going to pull in, spend 30 minutes there, and go on. Do I really spend $30 for that? Skip it.
Yeah,
I saw 7 parks in one day. That if I had to spend at each one, I would have gotten a parks pass for an entire year for one day of travel versus that. So yeah, I'm there for the roads and for 30 minutes of whatever I can see on foot.
He was there for the parks that day. I know that.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, I think we're gonna wrap this up. I know that we covered a lot of ground tonight, and you all had some pretty unique experiences to share, and I appreciate you guys coming on and sharing them with us. And thanks for joining us. I know that this was kind of hastily put together, but I thought it was important to, before we go any further here with the next season of programming, that we kind of take a look back to show you guys a little bit of the behind the scenes stuff of what we encountered along the way during our travels. So that when you see the stuff in the webinars and in the virtual tours, you know exactly what went into it during this year. But I want to thank Steve and Josh and Anthony for joining us. It was great having them and their perspective on things. And thanks to all of you in the chat who joined us. It was great seeing you guys as well. Hope you'll join us again next weekend and in the weekends after that. We got another great weekend coming up. Week 2 of Season 2 is going to be upon us before you know it. Guys, any parting shots before we sign off?
I'm just going to reiterate, please don't do anything stupid.
I think that's, that's a safe lesson for life these days, yeah.
Don't be a super spreader, please.
And I'm going to say, don't feel that you're stuck at home. Don't feel that you have to stay at home each night. It's not that dangerous to be out there, but be smart about it, and please obey any laws and regulations that are in effect where you live.
Right, and there is all sorts of professional guidance out there, as to what the risk factors are and how to minimize them. I will say, please seek professional advice rather than listening to us, since there are people that are better qualified to talk about these things than we are. We're trying to follow the advice you will likely find if you look for it, but go to the source.
Yeah, I think that's all sound advice, and I think that continuing to be smart during this is the way to go. So hopefully everybody can continue to stay safe and healthy this winter and beyond. But from all of us here, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Take it easy.
Adios.
Take care.